Hi everyone. So I wanted to go over some of the changes that I made to my multimedia montage project. So as you saw on my blog that I will be working on an American Dream unit with my students, and here was my rationale so that students can really collaborate and address all the standards. I used a few images here. But as I was looking at the multimedia montage project self-assessment, I realized that I needed to incorporate more visual to my students. So although I'm incorporating some images here for my classmates, it was really important that I make sure that it was given to my students as well. So one of the biggest aspects of this project is the due dates and the timeline. So as you can see over here, I have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5. Every day a student will be completing a chapter, and they will be using different multimedia sources. So as you can see, chapter 3, journal entry, blog, they'll be doing blog post, the Kaku graphic organizer, another graphic organizer using Kaku. They'll be creating outline essays. So here are some of the changes that I made. First and foremost, I decided to create a blog specifically for my students. So my blog starts off with the journal prompts. So here I decided to give my students journal prompts. And as the self-assessment checklist states, that students learn better when images are presented, so they learn better with words and pictures. So here's a picture of the Great Gatsby, and here are assignments for students to complete. And here are some written responses that I expect. So that's one of the changes that I made, as I made this blog that is very easily accessible. Another thing that I did for my students is I added some new tabs. So here is a new tab that I just added. It's a tentative reading schedule, because although I did hand it out to my students via paper, I thought it would be really important that they can see on the blog post. So they can essentially really rely on this blog post in order to catch them up, in order to inform them if they're missing work. Suppose they weren't paying attention in class, now they can use this to assist their thinking. So I felt like creating this tentative schedule for my students to see actually hit the nail on the head with Mayer's design principle when he says that people learn better when material is presented in segments, and people will learn better when they can see names and details. And even when it says that there are organizations of the presentation, I think this is extremely organized, and students can see exactly what they're doing in case they lose the physical copy that I gave them. Another thing that I decided to let students know is their objectives. And it's really important for students to know their objectives, because they get to know what they're learning by the end of the class. Now, I listed this objective, which is a new tab that I created this week, so that students have access to what they're learning. It's really important for them to know and to use their metacognitive thinking to process how they respond in class. Now, the standards are extremely formal, so it does not adhere to the personalization principle. However, when I show students my daily lessons, and this is also a new tab that I added, here is where they can make meaning with their informal standard or style, because I took the standard and I simplified the standard a little bit, and I put an I can, so that students know exactly what they're doing. I put a few lessons up here for students so that they can catch up and they can also see what is going on. Should students be absent? Should students want access? And even a way for them to possibly collaborate using different images or different software for collaboration. And here is 3 to 4 days lesson, and the great thing about this is if students want to click on the image, they can click the image. Now, I usually offer 3 do now choices, 3 multiple points of entry, so that every single person in the classroom has access to the do now, has access to a form of engagement. So suppose a student didn't know or understand question number 1, they can choose from question number 2, or suppose I had a student that was a visual learner. Every single do now has a visual. That goes back to my next step of the next tab, which is the optic strategy. This is also something that I will be doing with my students. So students do have access to this. This is extremely organized. The only thing that I didn't do is put due dates on the tabs because they don't necessarily have due dates. We'll work on it. The only thing that really has due dates and students need to follow is the readings. So the readings they are responsible for and the journal entries they are responsible for. But everything else is for them to use in accompany to our in-class lesson. Here's the optic strategy that I just added to the students' blog. They will have access to this, and they will have access to all images that correlate with the American Dream unit. So these are some meaningful images because we're looking at the American Dream as a perspective of, is it truly attainable for every American? What qualifies you to achieve the American Dream? So a lot of this is really looking at the American Dream with a certain perspective. So I put images that we will be analyzing in class using the optic image, and students will use the strategy to decode and essentially find the author's claim. Now, they don't know that they're completing one of the standards because it's simplified and reworded and made informal so that they have access to this information. The last tab that I added here was the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. Now, this is one of the collaborative assignments that you can see on the tentative schedule. So if you take a look at the tentative schedule and you scroll down, here we have the graphic organizer using Kaku and another graphic organizer using Kaku. So students will create a graphic organizer using some of the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. So I created a step-by-step directions for students to have access to, because according to Mayer's design principle, organization is very important. Narration, on-screen text. So here we have on-screen text. So instead of verbally telling the students the directions, they're actually looking at all the steps. Step 1, log on to Kaku. Decide what symbol your group will choose out of the list that I assign. Each group will be assigned 1 chart. So if you look at my symbolism chart, there are 4 bubbles, 1 per student. So a student cannot do this alone. They need careful collaboration to come up with a result that's bigger than what they're doing. So they must rely on every single student to work diligently. Finally, they will work collaboratively to share the different and discuss different elements and share aloud to their class, because every single group has a different symbol. Once we finish the novel that they are responsible for, that's located on the tentative reading schedule, they will be required to write an essay. So here is a tab for students to be carefully, where it says Great Gatsby outline. Students have access to the outline that I created. So here is a list. Students have access to a list of all the texts that they have read, and they have access to thesis statement starters, to introduction sentences, and everything that they need to do in order to guide them through their essay. So I felt like some of the changes that I made followed Mayer's design principles and some of the design principles in our book that we read, because I'm making use of margins. I'm really creating a website where students can easily navigate and post and follow directions.